Karen, it's for me really quite a privilege and meaningful to be able to open this space for conversation with you. You've been an important teacher to me, and I think I learned something from every conversation that we have. Um, you're a knowledge holder in your community, in the Isleta Laguna Pueblo tribe, and also a teacher with a deep Buddhist practice. And so being able to speak with you in this field where both of those sources of knowledge are able to speak through you or with you is really quite remarkable for me. And I think for a lot of people who will be listening to us. And I want to just start by asking you a little bit about your own trajectory as a holder of both of these sources of knowledge.
Well, both are one and the same. I think, I believe. So there's no separation or difference. And so, as I was initiated to care for in the medicine, it's to be able to see things and hold things in a deeper level, I would say. Um, And so I end up incorporating both the Buddhist practice and my traditional practice together. And it seemed to be at the same time when those two came together in 1997, both the going into a deeper practice with the Buddhist practice and going on meditation retreats. And luckily, I had Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg to really help me integrate those teachings and talking to my family and the community. What does it mean about the Buddhist practice? Because I had to get permission on that end too. We just don't jump into a Buddhist practice just because of our own personal desires. When you take on the medicine, you have to look at how it encompasses and includes all. And with the traditional medicine, I didn't give my own permission for that. I end up ignoring it, and then my medicine mother ended up asking permission from my parents for that obligation. And it's a lifetime obligation, so is a Buddhist practice. So it all came together. So all in all, I was granted permission and given permission by my parents. And also, it wasn't just me um, saying, "Hey, I want this," or I choose to do this. It all came together to where I felt like I had to do it.
Mhm. And I wonder if you could situate us a little bit in that process of being a holder of medicine in a tradition, having that wisdom and all the responsibility that's implied by holding a source of wisdom, how it was that your Buddhist practice integrated or related or sat together with that knowledge.
There are vows, like any ordinary Western medicine. You take vows when you become a doctor. Well, with traditional healing, there are certain vows that you have to take, and um, most times medicine keepers cannot share that. But in my sense, what I could share is that I was to be able to bring the medicine out to people that um, are born of different cultures, but yet with tribal and Pueblo cultures, because they didn't want the tradition or the way and the method to relate with prayer or healing to be lost. So that's why I was asked to be able to share that with particularly children and youth or individuals that were stuck in that situation. The vows are basically it's 24/7 that I'm supposed to be available, whereas in medical practice, it's when you're on the job 8 to 5. And then also I had to learn, and it took me 7 years to learn from different healers of various types of medicine. And usually it takes quite a while, many years to learn the medicine. So one could not just step in and say, I'm a medicine keeper in that way. So what I've learned and what was provided for me or end up coming together for me was the herbal medicine, um, how to collect herbal medicine and how to utilize it among various cures and techniques, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual. And that's what a lot of people come to me for. The other one is really knowing the crystal medicine and knowing how crystals, based on their properties and based on their face and their dimension, how to utilize them. I often use that with more deeper healing, and you would call it, I guess people call it psychic surgery. I could also do crystal healing on a physical level, um, in internal organs, without opening up like the Western way, opening up the body, but you can do that energetically with a crystal internally. I also was taught to use flower remedies, and that's different than plant medicine because of the geometric designs. And I think in utilizing Buddhist practice, that came more clear when I was meditating more intensely. So being able to see on a energetic level about the geometric spaces and designs that a natural environment or stars or earth, sand, various trees or plants hold, the intelligence they hold, and being able to see it in various circumstances. When that was given, I was lucky to have guidance with Joseph Goldstein, but then yet I had guidance also on the other end with my medicine father and also my medicine mothers. And luckily I had, my main initiator, medicine mother, who was from Acoma, Pueblo, but also I had other medicine elder mothers that took me on that were Dene, and my medicine father that took me on was Lakota and also Dene. So I came in with a wide variety of knowledge in how to utilize this. It was the Buddhist practice to be able to train me to quiet my mind. And so I already had an altar, but with the Buddhist practice, it gave me more of a structure how to uh, develop a space, how to enter and leave, although we're taught that already early on in our tribal tradition with meditation, how to care for your body and mind. That was already given to me when I was such a young girl by my grandparents. But I think the Buddhist practice made it more in a structure. Um, what the traditional practice does is allows you, in my sense, in the tribal tradition, is allows you to understand the various levels of that meditation practice. Um, and it's more of a, I guess, more of a widely threshold, but yet very narrowed and centered. So putting those two together allows me to um, understand both spaces where people and individuals come from, whether they're in an illness perspective or a disorientation perspective, or just holding a container for people. And that's how I designed some of my retreats in that way.
You mentioned the intelligence of trees and the conversations that we've had prior to today, especially around the retreat that Adam Lobel, you and I are co-facilitating on Buddhist animisms. Um, Based on reflections that you shared in those conversations, we're anchoring ourselves in the notion of opening channels to the natural world, to the land, and to natural spirits. And I wonder if you could talk about what this entails.
Hmm. I understand in the Buddhist practice, if you sit, yourself becomes a center. But with the source of the medicine, of the tribal medicine, which I have obtained and come through and utilized both traditions, I've understand that the trees are all beings that Mother Earth nourishes and provides. They have such a special intelligence, a uniqueness that goes beyond the human consciousness. And it's strange because one needs to be very aware and knowing that intelligence and being open for it, right? So that involves a very concentrated space. And one has to really know beforehand in ego state of where you come from, and also knowledge state, because that ego can be interpreted as like, oh, that's my knowledge state. And you have to learn how to let go of that in order to build the relations with the trees or the plants or the flowers or the waters, so that they can then start talking on another level that one would be able to be receptive to. So one has to understand the time of days. You know, what is the essence and um, what is in the morning dew time, and that was one of the protocols. I had to get up early in the morning before sunrise, because that's a special time of day in where there is communion of plant nature, of the water nature. And yet there are certain times of when the human body, would be most receptive. There are times of the day when, in the moon cycle, when there is special messages given to the plant medicine, to the roots, to the waters, than any ordinary season or any ordinary time, a cycle of the moon. And so we already know that the ocean relates to that, right? There is a lot of movement with the waters at that time, depending on the full moon or the new moon. Um, but what I've learned with both practices, one must be aware again of the ego. One must be aware as to how much knowledge of both sides need to be obtained. So you're always reading, you're always becoming more aware, and you use those knowledge as tools, not to become part of your ego, but to become part of that knowledge system within you that could vibrate the cells that can become awakened. The other thing is that, which I find important, is that making sure the heart space is open. And I find in the Buddhist practice, people don't often check their heart space. They sit and they assume that just breathing in, breathing out, and being aware, yes, that's an entry. But what is the obligation in our space to carry that, particularly when we're working with our Mother Earth and the plant nature? We have to meet it. We're obligated to become awakened and aware at that moment. So that's why there have been simple steps. What do you smell and what are those senses that awaken you? And how does it affect the body? My grandfather did that so early on in my life, where we would go to various places around New Mexico, and we had turquoise mines or copper mines and various things. But he would put a grandfather, we call them grandfathers, in which people normally relate to as stones. Um, but he would put a grandfather in my hand and just say, I want you to feel and sense in your body in what is it and where is it. Now, don't think about it. I want you to utter the first words. When that happens, you're already starting to be are opening those channels to where the environment starts communicating first. Um, However, when you start using your brain, he said, you're starting the communication. And a lot of times you have to stop your communication and allow the others to communicate first before you can have this reciprocity, before you can have this receiving and giving. And so that's the first step, is just really being aware on that level of intelligence. Who's intelligent? And a lot of times we need to let go of our own, but yet awakening the intelligence of awareness within ourselves. So that's where I'm coming from.
Mm. Do you see teachings or practices in Buddhism that can help enhance that or start that receptivity and support people in awakening their relatedness or openness to allow natural beings to speak to them and to be open to how that alters and governs who is there, who is who in that shared field?
Right. I've been taught in various traditions. So um, the Dogen teachings really give about the elemental teachings. And it really works with the breath and the body to start in that movement. So there is an awareness of deities and beings on that level, which I really, really appreciate. I started out with Thich Nhat Hanh because Thich Nhat Hanh really related to what tribal people are in relations to, and that is first and foremost the environment. So Thich Nhat Hanh did a lot with the environment, and that's what started me into the Buddhist practices. Is by getting and knowing that we are part of the natural world. And that's when I actually was invited to sit with the Dalai Lama at Santa Fe Indian School. And when we met with the Dalai Lama, we didn't hold him as if the highest being. No, he was just another brother. It's like, well, who are you? What do you got to share? And when that talk and receiving that talk, it was just complete dialogue. It's like, yeah, what do you got to share? And we realized that we had so much similarities in being with the environment, and also our lineage on a human level of life and death and birth, um, and also about initiations and womanhood and manhood. Those were very similar to our traditions as to the similarity to his biological lineage. Um, so with the Vipassana, it gives you such in structure to sitting as a first way of watching the breath and sitting if one is not disciplined. And I use that often when I'm going into ceremony. I work with other individuals on that level. Let's just start with the breath. And it works a lot with trauma that I've used with patients and people in the hospital or different situations, because uh, taking the medicine, I even brought it into Western medicine. I'm able to use that. But I've used that Vipassana teaching. Let's just feel the sit bones. let's just go with the breath. I've worked with Zen tradition, and theirs is so strict in practice. And when I was studying with a Korean family, when our family was dealt with illness, they were Zen practitioners, and they were very strict. And I often used when they brought laughter in, laugh, laugh. And how can you laugh when you're given an order? But pretty soon that laughter came, and it was like, bam, it almost cut like a knife. And they allow then this routine of structure and stiffness and hardness. And it felt very similar to some of our tribal ceremonies, to where you had to have that in order to endure. And I was just recently on at a ceremony where you had to endure many hours dancing without complaint, without going with that thought. And now you're taking your thought into another direction without those physical limitations. So I found a lot of various Buddhist practice very similar to our tribal practices. Um, long time ago, our elders would go into seclusion and isolation. Well, that's what happened deep in, with in a deeper Buddhist practice with Nepal and Tibet, where they go into caves. Well, that's not foreign to us. It's very similar. So there's a blend in everything, and you see the blend of sitting on cushions. Well, we do have cushions as well. That wasn't foreign to me. It was foreign to me about so many cushions, and yet, and we have altars. That wasn't foreign to us. We have altars, but yet we have different things placed on our altars. One thing in Buddhist communities is they don't recognize direction and elements as being part of that retreat, whereas in tribal we do. We recognize those as part of our own ceremonies and retreat. So that's where those various traditions come in.
So, talking about ceremony or rituals in a Buddhist context, I think often we recognize that they can open up other states or levels of consciousness. I wonder if you see that opening or those states of consciousness as connected with our ability to encounter non-human intelligence or be more open to the presence of the land or natural spirits around us.
All beings have the capability. All beings. I mean, I have a 4-year-old grandson, and I encourage it. It's when we get discouraged through schooling and through lack of time and parenting not encouraging, or intergenerational, um, we get discouraged from it. So we all have that ability. Unfortunately, through the trainings of various practices, we have a tendency to only fulfill that practice, and sometimes that can limit us in fulfilling and following those strict practices. So if we allow them to unfold sometimes in a natural sense, that would be wonderful. And one way would be, why aren't we eating in seasons? That is Mother Nature's practice, following seasonal eating. So right now we're in the fire of the harvest, right? The fire. And so our practices should be with not only with foods, of eating fiery foods or foods that we could digest easily with a lot of activity. And we're using activity because we can be outside with physical activity, running, walking, gardening, biking, cleaning our outdoors. And then also in our mind as well. This is when we should be taking those, ideas in the spring and then implementing them now in the summer. This is a time when we're communing a lot with the community, with our family, with socialness, because we're allowed to. The temperature's great. This is a time we really need to watch how we really utilize our speech, and that should come from within the fire. So, these practices don't teach that, and they don't incorporate the real natural rhythm of Mother Earth. And that's what tribal practices do, and encourage to do.
So I know that you're a healer in your community, and working with the elements is an important part of your medicine and our relationship to them. Could you talk about ways for people who have a Buddhist practice to identify and to start to order our lives more around the presence or awareness of elements?
It's I want to say it where it said on a deeper meaning, and not necessarily where it's like, oh yeah, it's a bullet point. You fought, 1, 2, 3, and so that's a difference between Western thinking and versus the spiritual thought. Because I often get this messages on a spiritual message, and it's saying I got to be careful about how I present this, so that's not taken to where it's like, oh yeah, I do A through Z and I'm fine. You know what I mean? So if it was taught in a retreat and the situation was set up to introduce the elements, then it would be proper, because then we have those elements available. What I want to say is that different traditions believe in different elements. Now, in my elements, what I'm talking about are the fire, air, water, and earth, those four elements. And I utilize those four elements in healing the body or the mind. Those are the only elements I look at. If somebody comes to me with any concerns about the mental, emotional level, I hear their story, but I'm going into their body and feeling their body, and I can often feel it within myself. But I'm looking at which element is lacking, which element is most, unbalanced, which element needs to be introduced back again, or which element needs to be, um, slowed down a bit, and how can they utilize those four elements to promote balance in their body. Um, and it depends on age too. How old are they? Are they able to carry those elements in their container right now in their age? Or are they very active to where the elements will be imbalanced already? What's their home situation? What's their community situation? Um, how do they carry themselves? And what is in the home themselves, that will decrease the elements frequency and utilization? Are they using toxins in the home, cleaning agents on their body, in their clothing? um, all those things affect the elements, so it's hard to describe what you're asking for with a greater respect, and I
Mhm.
hope one would understand.
Absolutely. You've pointed out also in other conversations that we've had that sometimes cultural knowledges can be helpful to open channels to the land, to the elements, to natural spirits, and sometimes they can keep us stuck listening to human voices. Could you say more about this?
Now we're talking on plant nature, we're not talking on the human level, because on the human level I would just want to make sure it's very clear there is cultural appropriation. And as tribal people, we've been very affected by the disadvantages of expressing too much or people taking too much and then utilizing inappropriately. But when you're talking about it from the plant nature, there is an appropriation where it needs to be reversed, where we often discredit or often imbalance with nature. And so, it's little as taking and receiving.
Karen,
Um,
you just broke up for a second. Could you just
okay.
say that again?
Yeah. So I'm sorry. There is, go back to the question because I want to make sure I address on the plant nature.
Mm. So for you mentioned in a previous conversation that when we're looking to acknowledge our relatedness to non-human kin, it can be helpful sometimes to use cultural knowledges to do that. And sometimes we can end up stuck
Yeah.
listening to human voices. And I
Right.
wonder if you could say more about that.
It's all of us have come from a cultural and tradition. If you just go back, because if you go back to the seven generations, the cells resonate. And everybody has gone back. If they've gone back seven generations, they have been in a relationship with Mother Earth, their own practices and their own way. Some way, somehow, they had to relate to Mother Earth and they had to make sure that the wind, the water, Mother Earth grew, produced, and also the sun. I mean, people were affected by the sun being so powerful, and some weren't. So I think if we all go back to our own culture and instead of borrowing so much from others, where it becomes unknown it deeply. I'm talking deeply internally on the cellular connection because that's the spark that starts relating deeply internally knowing because those trees have been here for hundreds of years. So has Mother Earth beyond that, thousands of years. And although the people may not survive, Mother Earth always survives and they always have that memory with it. So it's best culture, you can start off with your practice and know your practice, how you relate to Mother Earth. If you're going to borrow another culture, identify why you are borrowing it and asking permission for borrowing that culture. That's why I really undertook and permission both ways. The Buddhist practice, permission had to be given. It's not my practice, it's the Buddhist practice. Where was the Buddha from? You know? So I'm very careful with that and how I relate to Mother Earth. And if I go visit somewhere else in relation to Mother Earth, I always make an offering. I want to know their ancestral lineage of that Mother Earth because that vibration still holds in those trees and those plants in the natural form. That's who I want to communicate with. And those are the channels that are going to be given the medicine and knowledge in that way. Um, People find back here in the Southwest, the land of enchantment, many things become challenged if they're not open consciously, connectedly, or yet there has been deep, deep healing that happens. And it happens to those that really, are aware of who the ancestrals are, where that knowledge comes from, and then it just starts flowing on a deeper level.
So I want to ask more about this because right now there's such a broad recognition that native original peoples and or indigenous communities have been much better kin to the non-human world and hold knowledge that the world needs right now about sustaining reciprocal relationships to the land. And so there's starting to be some awareness of that, and it's a moment in which we can see, in many senses, a broad turn to the indigenous. And as you're pointing out, we also see a great deal of appropriation of such knowledges and have seen it for a long time. Could you talk about what right relationship looks like with those sources of knowledge? What does a respectful or right relationship with cultural knowledges look like?
Mhm. We're going to be writing about it, and we had a paper and discussion about that, about allyship, and what does that mean? Um, and I just want to make clear right away, I'm speaking on behalf of tribal, and particularly my tribe, meaning we have a practice within our tribe, whereas indigenous is often a term used to generalize those beyond that come from various cultures. So some people end up saying they're indigenous, and then yet there's various levels of how they practice those cultures. And I can't speak for the worldwide per se, but for what I was raised, you must relate because our Mother Earth is our home. And we treat our four walls, our home, with such respect. And I mean, it's part of Mother Earth already, especially here in the Southwest. And then we have ceremonial in all tribal area across the US, we have, lodges. Those are made out of Mother Earth, and there are lessons and teachings about Mother Earth in that lodge. So there's no separation. Um, we're taught that we are only four elements. So there's no separation of Mother Earth in that of who we are. Um, and then our waters, everyone has a sacred mountain place, and there's no separation of that either. I mean, so for me personally, it's it's hard to think of that I am separate, that I'm that it's hard to think of that separation. It's not a separation. It just is and will be. So therefore, the next generation, like my daughter, you have to get down on your knees and you have to understand how to be able to grind the corn and why are you grinding it and for what reason. You have to watch your intentions in the morning. Um, about reciprocity and asking permission. We're always asking permission. I mean, before we gather water, before we make a journey, before we make a pilgrimage, um, we've asked permission. We ask our bodies permission to be in unison with nature. And sometimes it's 4 days beforehand, or sometimes it's months beforehand. Um, and so for me, raising cattle, I'm always asking permission before I step on the grounds of where, although in human form we have gates and fences, that's a human form. But I always carry tobacco or cornmeal in my vehicle in the truck. And my grandchildren must ask permission before they cross over. It's like you have to have permission in order to be with the land. You have to have permission in order to be with the animals. You have to tell them what you're going to be doing and how you're going to do it, and then put the offering down and then walk in. When you leave, you go back and say, thank you, thank you. And whatever you see, whether there is rain that has been touched, water that is in the trough, you go up to it purposely and say, thank you so, so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you, rain maidens, for making your travel here and making the grass grow, for the cows to rejuvenate and gain their strength. And then you sit there and talk with the cows and say, I'm here. I'm here to take care of you. How are you doing? Can I see you? Are you injured? Is there something I need to know? Um, can it, can we make your life easier? So my grandson, 4-year-old, gets a shovel. He starts hoeing the hoeing the thorns. My 7-year-old granddaughter goes and I'll check the water. That's her job, to put her hands in there and say, okay, how's the water? How does it feel? Um, Giving thanks to it. Their job is to count also the cows and seeing eye to eye, what are they doing? This is what I mean about being very open and having this reciprocity. Reciprocity is never ending. And in the white man's way, in the non-traditional way, it's like, oh, here's cash. And that's the same which Donna is, give Donna, giving cash. In my training and thinking, it's not just cash. Yes, cash helps you to bring some livelihood into your body. But when we're doing Donna and RN, it's big. It's really big. It's how will you be able to sustain the healing practice and what I've received in order to gain balance. What is that felt? Not only for self, but my family, my significant other, my children, my family, and then my community, my home, how I can take care of the home and animals. So this Donna per se, and this act is really needs to be felt far and beyond. Um, some healers way back in another tribe have asked for trucks, and they're saying, "What? Yeah, if you're asking for healing, I asked for a truck." In some sense, that can be a little bit too much in the Western way of thinking. But if you look at it in the tribal sense and saying, okay, this is today's time frame, it makes sense because he's traveling to go get groceries for himself and his family. He's going to go out to work with the animals. He's going to bring in this or bring out that. So in some sense, it makes sense, right? But in the Western thinking, it's like, what? A truck? It's way too much. It's this and that, and it's hard to think of. But I started laughing because it's like, okay, this is how one would relate in this Western world of thinking. So what do we owe Mother Earth? We owe everything, more than a truck.
Mm, yeah, you're pointing to something in one area that we also see in the transmission of Buddhist practices, a kind of a commercialization or an insertion of Buddhist practices into, transactional cycles where there's a price tag put on it. And this is something we've spoken about before, that certainly in the Buddhist time and also in much more traditional contexts in Tibetan communities today, you never sell a ticket to an event or put a price tag on the offering of spiritual knowledge. That there is and this is part of the fundamental relationship between monastics and lay communities, that there is a symbiotic reciprocity where monastics must give the Dharma and they must give it freely, and then are actually dependent on the support and the sustenance of people who are receiving from them. So this kind of unending reciprocity where you're building a relationship, you're not closing a cycle with a transaction. So this is also happening in this particular moment where there's you know what this I'm hesitant to even use the phrase, because the first time I heard it, it was so bone chilling, but there's a spiritual marketplace where people promote their product and or themselves, and and it very much comes into the dynamic that you've just discussed about what we understand relationship to be, and how to embody our relationships respectfully, and allowing reciprocity to flow through them.
Mhm. Mhm. And it starts with the self, it starts with the home. I mean, it starts with our own lodge, our own body. Are we actually feeding it the best foods ever? And then in a timely basis, are we actually treating her? And so it always starts in the beginning, and it starts with our mind, it starts with our sitting practice, it starts with our body of how we care for it. And then it goes outwardly, to others, to our own home, our own bed, our own belongings. Are we really caring for them in the best nature of all? And for what reason? What would be the intentions? Um, all are provided by Mother Earth. All walls, furniture, wood, our beams, steel, glass, everything comes from Mother Earth, and people forget about that and think that it's just a, a practice to tag on to, but no, it's deep. It's if you can't practice within your own car in your own home, then just start with the self. Then how do you care for yourself?
Mhm. Yeah, this part of what we're looking at is are the consequences of late capitalism and settler colonialism, where at best you give some money for what you've taken, at worst it's just taken, versus this way of living relationships where we know that's not the way to live in relationship. And
Yeah,
right now we're seeing at this terrifying pace the consequences of how the earth is increasingly affected by that particular paradigm of relationship, or that mindset. And I wonder, what do you think mindfulness and Buddhist practice or practitioners can offer individually and collectively to address those harms?
well, Mother Earth is always open and wanting somebody to recognize, and just a recognition. And it has to come from awareness of recognition, and it has to come from the heart. So working with the heart yourself, and being able to open to the smell of the tree, being open to how they communicate, being open to the colors, being open to the feeling and sensation. That's the first step. It's just having this interrelatedness, and they know already. I mean, even animals know already. I mean, people have dogs, and they can relate to dogs in that way, but it's a chain reaction that happens, and just that simple thought can go really deep and really far and penetrate it, even across Mother Earth onto the other side of it. So being very careful intentionally about the thoughts and what you're thinking and how you're thinking, what you're saying and how you're saying on a normal basis. But uh, because those intentions are picked up, we're not separate from Mother Earth. It's that vibration's always there. Whether we think we're not talking to it or not, we're still talking to it. We're inseparable.
I wonder if you could share any final thoughts that might reach people through these air vibrations that we're putting out in maybe in urban spaces like Mexico City or Buenos Aires, where people feel this longing and yet are surrounded by cement that makes it hard to fully live those relationships, and yet they're there. Do you have any reflections that you could share with them?
Well, one is the ancestral knowledge, being aware that they do have ancestral knowledge. Everyone does. They just need to be aware of their own ancestral knowledge and just start bringing it out.
and saying, and have them in front of them. You know, you're sitting in a meditative state, but have your ancestrals in front of you and before you and say, we are going to work with Mother Earth. Help me relate with Mother Earth. As I hold this container of water, I'm going to put my breath on you and saying how delicate and special you are. I'm going to place a little bit on our Mother Earth, my home or my body, and I'm going to take you in, knowing you came from our Father Sun, traveled all the way down into Mother Earth, and I mean, made the longest travel just to be in this container. And then also, some way, somehow, just by that first breath outside, just give an appreciation, because you know that breath came from trees. It came from the water. It came from the seas. It came from the animals that touched our land before us. It is a collective. And we just need to stop and think before we talk that every word, we're taking it in breath. And we're going to deliver it outwardly. What would want to be delivered outwardly? And that's why I was asked to go out first thing in the morning before the sunrise. What would be my first offering? By smelling that sweetness of that air and then putting it back out. We often forget about that during conversations. We often forget about, and a lot of times our ideas are the first thought that comes out. We need to really look at that. Are they our ideas? Why and who am I speaking to? And if we learn to speak to ourselves first, I love you. I'm going to calm myself down. I appreciate you. I'm going to be kind to you. I'm listening to you. That's the first thing of bringing awareness within yourself. And then you can go outside. I love you. I feel you. I want to be kind to you. How can I help you? Then we're putting those two together with Mother Earth. But we got to understand ourselves first. And then that message to the others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Damcho. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm glad we're able to talk.
Me too, very much so. And I'm very glad that people in many different parts of the world where Spanish is spoken will be hearing these words and also taking them in and treasuring them, I'm sure.
Well, we all share the same Mother Earth. And so their positive thoughts will reach our people here in our communities. And I want to thank them for that. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.